Hello, my name is Woody. Thank you for listening to Change in the House of Pods, a podcast about Deftones. My guest today is Matt James from Vowws.
The choke of the smoke and the flame are one and the same. Stay where you are, stay
Let me tell you, this is hands down one of my favorite conversations in the life of this podcast, and for a number of reasons. I love Vowws, and we talk quite a bit about their history here, their creative process, and their new song, Stay Where You Are.
Stay where you are. Holy water. It's the ocean.
If you haven't seen the video, pause this and watch it right now. And if you're not familiar with Vowws, I think you'll discover pretty quickly why they're so awesome. Their music is haunting and undeniably ass-wiggling, and there's a cinematic quality to it that is increasingly matched by their visuals. It's really no wonder why Chino put us onto them. And we'll talk about that, what it's like when Chino Moreno tells the world your band is dope, and then to do a song with him. And Matt was amazing because he was able to articulate both the technical and artistic implications of that collaboration. Really amazing, insightful stuff. Next week, you'll hear me speak to Ralph Torres from Total Meltdown. The week after that, I've got Jeff Cagle, Minnesota's #1 Deftones fan, Zach and Kelly from 30 Nights of Violence, and after that,
Creed parties.
Bron Daler from Mastodon. Yes, you heard that right.
Creed parties.
And after that, at the end of the year, I'll go on a little hiatus before we come back for season 2 in the spring, maybe late winter, not sure yet. And before we get going here, I want to express my gratitude to you for going on this ride with me. I wasn't exactly sure what this podcast would be before I started. I just knew I wanted to talk about my favorite band, and it's been extremely rewarding just to have these conversations. But when I see people are listening and on occasion reach out to me, it's the fucking coolest. And I want to tell you, I really appreciate you listening. I do. I hope you had a chance to watch the video for Stay Where You Are, because that's what we're going to start talking about first. This is my conversation with Matt James from Vowws. Well, I definitely want to talk about Deftones. Obviously, I want to talk about Deftones. But I also want to talk about Stay Where You Are.
Yeah.
What a kick-ass song. And an amazing video that I would rewatch just for comedic value alone. Like, I can't tell you how perfect the caricature is of like the opposite of the interviewer that I want to be. Like, that's my anxiety when I go into any interview, is like, I'm going to be that lady.
That's the anxiety on the artist side of it too. I'm sure that is probably obvious, that like you're just going to get someone that's like accidentally condescending and doesn't know they are, and it's just a dingbat in some way or another. Like, it just makes it really hard.
Well,
so yeah, we've had that before, so we wanted to do something like that.
Yeah, I would imagine that had come from some personal experience.
Yeah.
It's so on point though, because she's just so atrocious. They're just absolutely brilliant. And then the whole like lo-fi public access look of the aesthetics of the video itself, just super cool. Just super cool.
Thanks, man. That's all. That's mostly Riz. Just she's really good at that stuff.
So, in talking about the song, characterize the song for me. How would you describe "Stay Where You Are"?
A pretty straight ahead, sort of gothy, punky thing. I'm really bad with describing our music. I've eventually, like, we took a long time to settle on death pop because it just seemed like the right genre. It seemed like we found out death pop was a thing after we called ourselves that. So not sure whether we picked it up subliminally somewhere else or not, but we sort of settled on that as a good, like, almost descriptor. And then we found out that it's a really like sparsely populated genre anyway. So even though there are other bands that supposedly have done it, we sort of found that feels like it's ours or something. But besides that, like, I'm really bad at describing our music because I'm so in it, and
Sure.
I can describe it in terms of what went on in our heads. Like, I wanted to do something really straightforward, something. The song before that we released, Impulse Control, was much more of a sort of weird sort of swaying thing that had little changes that were meant to take people by surprise and stuff. I just wanted this one to be more of a driving thing. So yeah, straight ahead goth punk song.
I kind of found it a little bit surprising because
Yeah.
I've been familiar with you guys since Dia de los Deftones, since I found out
Oh,
that
yeah.
you guys were going to be on the bill for that, and so I've
Yep.
been following your music and what you've done since then. And to me, especially thinking about music being made in the pandemic, and I don't know if this song was crafted during the pandemic,
Yes,
but
it was.
it was. So
Yeah.
and that to me is so surprising because it feels almost more poppy than Death. Do you know what I mean? Like it feels a little
Yeah,
like
yeah.
almost happy. I'm not
Yeah.
going to go as that far as to say happy. Um what was what do you think about that? Is that weird?
It's not weird. I mean, I get that, like, as far as definitely as far as like the beat is concerned, like it's definitely like a poppy thing. Like it's almost maybe, I don't know if synth poppy would be the right term, but it's definitely, I mean, what I was saying about it being straight ahead, that's sort of, you could say that's a similar thing as the pop thing, I think.
Sure.
So yeah, no, that makes sense. That's not weird. It's good to hear that though, because sometimes hard to get a perspective on exactly what your stuff is like.
When you're so in like immersed in it, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. Just too close to it to really know.
What do you think of, because I know you guys are working on another album.
Yep.
What do you think about all of this stuff that you're creating? It sounds like you're creating quite a bit of it in these pandemic times. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, spend a decent amount of time speaking for myself. I can't always speak for Riz,
Sure.
but I think, so I'll stick to that. But I think for me, it's been, last year and the year before, we spent a lot of time traveling. So a lot of stuff happened for us last year. So we didn't have much time. We wanted to do a new record for a while, but we really weren't finding enough time to sort of stop and get bored, if that makes sense. Like, and not to use the Deftones song
Sure.
tag, but
No, that's perfectly acceptable here.
yeah. As I said it, I'm like, yes, I'm segueing in.
You're doing my job for me.
Yeah. Oh, because I'm an aspiring podcaster.
There's no money in it.
Yeah, don't worry, there's no money in music either. So where was I? Yeah, just having the time to, it really is about like getting rid of distractions and stuff, like good writing for me. So having that time is as fucked up as this year obviously is. It was a mixture of like having all that time to think and to marinate and stuff, but also like so much intense shit like in the news, like coming at us all the time. So it was and I've always found that news, good or bad, like the way the world is, has been a pretty big, I tend to try and take as much of it in as I can manage without going crazy, and then let it sit there. And then when I'm writing, especially lyrics, I'll just sort of like let whatever's coming out come out. And a lot of the time it tends to be like word paintings about like the way the world is. And so that process has been pretty intense during this time, obviously, because there's been not many distractions and lots of fucked up shit going on. And like, I don't know, it's not all fucked up. It's just been intense and there's not been anything to detract from that. So as far as writing, it's been kind of productive, good in that sense. To really have the time to focus on it and see how the world is affecting us, me, Riz, whatever.
Are you constantly creating it with all of this time, or are you finding yourself in a routine of, I don't know, doing other things, or is it just completely immersed in music?
Yeah, I mean, it's daily for sure. It's not all day every day, but I try and I write a lot through routine. So having all of my spare time, I'll set aside like 3-hour blocks or something and just sit down and see what happens. But it's not, there hasn't been much in terms of, there was a few times when stuff sort of seemed, it wasn't that it seemed pointless, but it was so uncertain that the general sort of fuzzy anxiety was like paralyzing. but that was only a couple of times. Like besides that, it's been, I mean, if I'm safe, if I've got a roof over my head, like it's sort of my duty to write during this time, you know, like, so we haven't really allowed ourselves to stop.
That's really cool. I think that's cool to like take that ownership and feel like it's your duty. I think that's, you know, as an artist, I'm not going to put any, impose any sort of authority on you, but it sounds like it's sort of your job, right? Like it's what you got to do.
That's the way I see it. Yeah. And it's like, I personally feel like I'd probably be in a better mental state if I wasn't sort of opening myself up to the world as much as I try to. But I do feel like filtering that, even if it's subconsciously, getting it in and having it come out through some sort of weird Vowws filter, I think that's really important.
And then at what point do you two collaborate? At what point do you come together in the creation process?
It's kind of fluid because you know, she's always giving me ideas, I'm always giving her ideas. So and it's not always. I mean, the first time we really collaborated on a song, I remember we were really young, and we had just met like not that long beforehand, and she joined this band that I was in that's like long defunct from Sydney, and she wrote down like basically what do you call those things that are like word maps? It wasn't exactly like that. It was basically just writings all over a piece of paper and a drawing and like just weird inspiration that didn't make logical sense, but it wasn't meant to. It was like a bunch of feelings and thoughts and just random shit. And I took that and thought about it for a second, and I went home and wrote some lyrics to this song we were writing. And it's kind of, that synergy has always been there, and it's micro like that, and it's macro as well as far as our life, and that includes things like I do more of the technical shit when it comes to the music, and she does more of the technical shit when it comes to like visuals and all of the visuals, like whether it be pictures, the videos. You know, she facilitates all that, she does all that, but we're so aligned as far as like our energies and back and forth and stuff that, you know, I have to give her more credit for the music, and I'm sure she would I'm sure she would give me some credit for the visual stuff, but it's just like the back and forth, you know. So it's hard to say exactly when we collaborate. Technically, like I write the lyrics, but again, nothing gets past her, you know. So, and she's got to sing it. So if I write the lyrics and there's a crappy line, then I have to go and rewrite it. And it's at the point now where I know if it's not good enough, pretty much, or I know if it's not going to sort of work.
You have the history together at this point that you know what's firing and what's missing. That's so cool.
Exactly.
Started in that way with the word map or the word puzzle, and then and a picture. To think that you guys started that way and then progressed into where you are now, being, you know, obviously so on the same page musically, but with the visual aspect of what you do. I mean, you guys wouldn't be the same without the visual aspect. I don't think. I wouldn't.
Exactly.
I wouldn't.
No, exactly. And it was uncomfortable for me at first because I don't like. It's not. She took it in a direction that was more intense than what I had pictured. But you know, I can see now, and obviously in hindsight, I can see even back then it was. It's kind of, so there's this story about when Nirvana were writing, I think it might have been In Utero, or maybe Nevermind, but Kurt was like, he knew that he had to make certain parts really fucking loud and heavy and distorted because he knew he was writing like Beatlesy pop songs and he didn't want it to be too like twee. And I sort of feel like with our stuff, there's an element of that. Like it needed to be driven visually into a direction where it was like a little bit more intense in some way or confronting or something, because there's elements of what I do personally as far as my crafting of the technical side of music that can be a little bit conservative or something. So as far as like the overall feel of Vowws, it was really important for her to take that initiative and push it in that direction.
That's really fascinating to hear you explain your yin and yang together, like the way that you have come to complement each other in like different on different levels. It's really, I guess that's ultimately what makes for a successful band, right? Like that's you've got
Yeah.
to have those complementary.
Yeah, you have to, definitely, and it can happen. It can overlap into so many different things. Like it's not just about complementing in the music, complementing in the visuals, like complementing in how we work together, or all that sort of thing. But yeah.
Did you guys come together initially with the same intent? Did you map out a path for your band or for what you were going to do? Like say, this is who we're gonna be.
Yeah. We're like just like we're dreamers to a fault. So I mean, we were in Australia and we were, you know, doing music there and on the touring circuit and had a band and stuff. But we always thought like Australia was, because it's hard to make a living in Australia. Most bands that that start out there, like their one thing, their big sort of dream is to get overseas. But so a lot of bands do it by sort of getting like recognition in Australia and then using that to get on the radio in America or like back in the day, whatever it was.
Sure.
But for us, it was like we sort of just wanted to get the fuck out of Australia as well. So we sort of skipped a step. So in that sense, it wasn't really like particularly planned, but it was just like this constant impulse that was driving us in a direction. And it's sort of been like that for a lot of our history, which has sometimes meant that like things have moved like either in fits and starts or slower than they might have or whatever. But again, like that, I mean, that's just part of the journey, and that allowed us some time to develop our music as well. It sort of, I think it needed a little bit of like being more fully realized at a certain point. The Great Sun, our first record as Vowws, like that was the first time that we'd done anything that was approaching a full length that we could be happy with the thing from start to finish. And I think that's because we didn't do things in a conventional or normal way from the start. So it takes a bit more time sometimes for something to become fully realized when it's like that. So yeah, we didn't sit down with a 10-point plan or a 5-year plan or anything like that. We sort of just knew what we wanted and impulsively reached for it, and it led us here, probably the long way, but it's who we are.
So the band that you two were in previously, was the music anywhere similar to what elements? I mean, obviously some similar players, so
Sure.
Similar elements, similar sound.
It had a drummer and a bass player. It had a bass player in it who was my best friend from high school, and a drummer who was the second drummer at the time, was someone else we met in Sydney. So there was that. So it was like a full band, and it was more of a band sound rather than having like drum machines and stuff in there, which Vowws does. It was probably a little bit more influenced by bands like Talking Heads. So it was a little bit more of that sort of like weird pop shit. It was probably, you could say it was much poppier than Vowws, like much more maybe cleaner and maybe a little bit more polished. The last thing that we did was probably a little bit more polished, which we deliberately steer away from with Vowws. We try and sandpaper it a bit, if that makes sense.
Can you talk about that, the sandpapering?
Yeah. Okay. So in essence, we're like an electronic act, I suppose you could say, because our basis is drum machines and synth basses and synths, and then I play guitar and we both sing. So it's very easy if you just take that format for us to just sound like those 80s synth pop records that are like really bright, and like they might, like a lot of them, I love a lot of them, but like production wise, they're really bright. They're like clean. There was the advent of digital recording in the 80s. So people were like, oh my God, we can make it even cleaner and brighter and fucking shinier. And you listen to that stuff now and it can just sound pretty dead. And so because we're doing a lot of stuff that's like sort of in the box, so to speak, like it's inside electronics and it's soft, some of it's software, but to use to record demos and things like that. What we always wanted to keep, and some of this harks back to our band days, but what we wanted to make sure we did, if we could, was to, deconstruct. Like, so we write songs, basically. We write it, in a like, we just have a shitty, tiny little home studio here. And we write the songs, and we'll play all our parts or whatever. We'll workshop them, we'll go back and forth, whatever needs to be done. Then as soon as we know it's like structurally ready, we'll we like start deconstructing it. So we'll take apart, like we might have like 3 or 4 different kick drum sounds, 3 or 4 different snare drum sounds, like 2 hats, 2 rides, like 4 basses, like all of this stuff. And like within reason, because, money can be a factor, but within reason, we take all of that stuff individually and we send it to, ideally in the past, we would be there, but it's a pandemic. But we send it to he's one of our best friends in America. We've known him since we first came here. But his name's Kevin McMahon, but not the industrial guy from the 90s. It's Kevin S. McMahon. And he runs a studio, Makata Recording in upstate New York. And he's a fucking great guy. We work really well with him. And what he does, like we feed him all of this stuff, and he takes each individual kick drum, each individual snare, each bass, each synth, and he puts it through all his equipment. And he's got all this Mad Maxed fucking bonkers vintage stuff, like an old Neve that barely works, and all the pots are kind of fucked, and like just has a really gritty sound to it. And it's a barn, so it's like he uses like the grain silo as like a reverb unit. Like he'll send the sound in there, so you'll hear that he's playing the barn, sort of thing, So sometimes our songs end up sounding like creaky old ships, and that's kind of the point. Like it starts with a guitar, or it starts on a computer or whatever, and then we deconstruct it and send it out through all this shit. Then we bring it back to us, and then we finish the mix. We get Kevin to do some mixing, some of the stuff that we couldn't do ourselves, like how to precisely EQ a bass drum for the maximum punch or whatever. And we take that stuff, and then because we know exactly where we want everything to be in a mix. So once it's gone through all of that, we bring it back full circle and we finish the mix. And that's what I mean by sandpapering it. So we're taking digital originated shit, besides the guitars. Like we're still pretty organic about how we write. We take this digital stuff, like all the digital elements that are in there, send them out to be made into fucking sanded oak table and sent back to us.
That's really cool. That's really fascinating to think about, because you do. I hadn't really articulated it before or thought about it like in the terms that you described, but I guess you do think of something as digital being clean, or you want it to have a certain brightness or sheen to it, and to take that away, I can hear that quality. I can hear that. In the way that you describe it. I think that's really fascinating. That's really cool.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you can.
You're pretty good at.
I think that makes sense.
You are pretty good at describing what you're doing. I don't know if
I get in depth. I can't describe it. I don't have a good elevator pitch. So I can. If you sit me down and talk about it, I won't stop. But if someone's like, "Oh, what's your band sound like?" I'm like, "It sounds like a band." Probably won't like it. Just don't worry about it.
Yeah. Is that shooting from the hip thing? That's why podcasts are cool, is because you get a little more time to spread out and figure out what you're going to say.
Exactly.
And then how do you recreate that sound once it's back to you? Then you have to go in and figure out what you're going to do, like to go live to perform those songs, right? Yeah,
no, it's tricky. It has to be. The stuff that works in the studio in that sense doesn't always work live. Like sometimes you actually have to use like cleaner sounds live to get it across, because you've got other things in the environment like that are, sound always fucks you live, like whether it's on stage or like the sound out front. So you've got enough sort of working against you already. So we tend to sort of just trust the arrangements a bit more, leave it a bit cleaner. And also we're, what's going on over the top is just by nature a little bit like energetically more sloppy, like you're playing live, so there's going to be like mistakes, and like none of that's bad. Like I think it adds to the feel of it, but it just means that maybe you don't have to use the dirty stuff as much, especially because we want our arrangements to come across as well. We want the song to have meaning and not just be like, because some of that stuff can sound quite harsh as well when you turn it right up and put it through a massive PA. Some of the stuff that when it's sandpapered, it can be a little bit too much. So we have to sort of balance it a bit more.
That's sort of allowing for that human element to enter into the equation, especially like you guys are still people performing music, and it's not like this digital experiment. Some of that is going on, but that's only part of the equation.
Yeah, exactly.
So how familiar were you with Deftones prior to working with Chino and taking part in Daedalus Deftones?
So when Riz and I first met, we were at college, and we had this thing that was like we'd do these performance nights where we all had bands, and we'd sort of like compete with each other and stuff. And what we decided to do was I would play drums and she would sing, and there was a bass player and a guitarist, and we'd play like heavy stuff. So we did some System of a Down songs, we did some Deftones, we did about 3 or 4 Deftones songs, I think. And that I was not super familiar with Deftones before that. This was in like mid 2000s. I was not super familiar with them before that, but it wasn't because they weren't in my wheelhouse. They were just a band that I missed for whatever reason. Sometimes there's bands that you just don't get introduced to them at the right time or whatever. But doing the songs, I was like, oh shit, I've missed something here. Like it's different to. Especially different to like pretty much all the other like quote unquote new metal stuff that they got lumped in with at the time. It had more feeling, it had more sort of imagination, like melodically and texturally and stuff as well. So when we were doing them, I was like, oh, there's really something here that I want to remember. One of the things, we can go into it later, I don't want to get too far off the question, but there was some melodic things that I've kept with me. It's a funny full circle story, actually.
Please, this show is all about tangents, so we'll get back to where we started whenever we get there. But yeah,
all right, we'll head off into the weeds.
Yeah,
it's not that complicated actually. So following on from what I was saying about when we were playing those songs, I noticed a lot of the emotion in Chino's vocals, but it wasn't just the way he sung stuff. It was his like melodic, his note choices and stuff. He did this one thing I noticed. I kept noticing it where he hit the ninth note. So if you're playing like if the chord underneath the root note is C, he'd be like an octave or 2 octaves above that playing D. And it has, especially if it's some kind of minor chord underneath that, it has a really sort of almost like floating quality to it. Mm. And he would do that a lot, and he would put sort of chorus on the vocal, so it sounded like weirdly ethereal, with like really tough drums and shit underneath it. So I really liked that sort of layer cake of like the skeleton is really tough and gritty underneath, and then on top you've got like a creamy sort of vocal. And I noticed that part of that had to do with that trick of like the singing the ninth up the top. So I used that like for certain things, and one of the things I used that for, I kept it as a little trick. Like it was one of those things, I'm going to paint with this color now. So I used that for a song's Structure of Love. That top note that he goes to is, I got that from him. So, but this was before I knew we were going to be working with him. I was like, oh, cool, I'm going to do that. I'm going to put that note in there. So I did that. And then when I think it was Riz suggested, because she found a guy that said, we found out that Chino liked us, firstly, that he was a fan. And then about a year later or something, we were like, why don't we see if we can get in touch with him and see if he'll sing something? And the obvious choice, Riz was like, it's got to be Structure of Love. And she didn't know why necessarily. And she didn't know that I'd taken that trick and used it. And then even like other people were saying, yeah, I can totally imagine him singing this. Anyway, so we sent it to him, and he dug it, and the rest is history, I suppose.
I mean, it sounds like you wrote it for him. It really,
Yeah, right.
The way he
Isn't
sings, I mean, it marries so well. I was going to ask for an example of this, but that is a terrific example of what you're talking about. Because
that note that he goes to is so natural for him.
how did you? Is that just being a studied musician and like knowing what you're doing? Because I don't know music. I don't listen to music in the same way that I would imagine that you listen to music. How did you figure that out?
Just by ear. Like, so, I mean, I know I'm pretty familiar with music theory and stuff. So, and I used to be a guitar teacher, so I got used to working stuff out and knowing what it meant. Even pretty early on, even before I was really good at music theory, I knew I had a good ear. I knew I could work stuff out by ear. So that was. It's funny though. He sent so little personal touches are really important. Like, so we sent him the instrumental version of that song. Just said, "Can you sing your part over the top?" And you can just send the part back, like just his solo vocal part back. And he sent it back. And firstly, we were listening to it going like, fuck, this is just solo Chino. Like, and Riz has been, she was a bigger fan than I was. Like, she was a sort of proper fan, like, in high school and stuff early on. So for her, it was kind of a bit of an emotional moment. But what we noticed was that he actually sung the melody differently. And I don't know whether he did it deliberately or not. Like, it could, because I think he comes from a pretty emotional place when he sings rather than like anything intellectual. So I doubt he would have like super studied the melody or anything. He just sort of sung what felt right. But then when we got it back, I was like, it's different enough that the chords sort of need to be different. So we were already going to like remake the song in terms of the sort of the window dressing stuff that makes a song, the drum beat, like whatever, like maybe a different bass line, something like that. But then when we got it back, it's like, well, let's change the actual chords themselves. So you're changing like the fundamental structure of like the harmony. And it made it it was challenging to start with because we had to start again. But it made it a much sweeter, straighter, more emotional track. And it gave us license to go there because it's a little bit harder to do that when you're doing it yourself. Like you sort of, it's low risk when you've got someone else involved, if that makes sense, because you don't have to own it completely. So we were happy to like go into a direction that we might not have gone ourselves. And that was purely because he just sort of sung it from the heart. And when we got it back, we were like, oh, this is it. We got to change it to suit what he felt like singing.
That's so fascinating. That's really interesting to hear how all of that evolved. What as a consumer, and you hear about people collaborating and sending things back and forth, and it at times seems really impersonal.
Yeah, it does, right?
But what you're talking about doesn't seem impersonal at all. It seems like he got this inspiration and felt this music, and then you organically decided to, work the song into being a whole off of that. That's really, really fascinating.
It's interesting because it's I get exactly what you're saying about how it seems impersonal. I sort of thought that too, but in a way, it's almost better because, well, for me, it's better. I think because I'm not great at writing around other people. So being in a room with other people, it can be personal and it can be intimate. So I'm tongue-tied. It can be personal and intimate because you're around other people doing something that's like potentially embarrassing. But for me, it can also get in the way. So having the freedom, and don't forget as well, like when you get, like, so with Chino, when he sent his part back and we press play on it, it's literally nothing but him singing. So it's really personal, it's personal in a way that if he was in the room, there'd be like this shield of like social awkwardness or maybe even embarrassment on people's part or whatever, because it's really confronting, just belting into nothingness. But so you get to have the intimacy of hearing someone sing your song, but it's not ruined by any potential awkwardness or anything like that. That's a personal. A lot of other people are much better at writing with other people than I am. I sort of I like to go. Can you come back in half an hour?
Right.
So that thing works. That arrangement works for me. The sending stuff back and forth. I think it's almost like the best of both worlds.
When you guys were covering Deftones tunes way back in the day, do you remember which songs you were doing?
So there was Bored. That one was real fun because Riz is a much better singer than this band gives her the opportunity to showcase. She'd go up and sing that really high note on Get Bored, and I'd get to slam the ride cymbal and make it really washy and big, and I loved that stuff. I fucking love drumming. I miss drumming. It's like that's the first thing I wanted to do was be a drummer. There was Bored. Change. That's the one that's like right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so there was that. I think there was like two more. I'd spend 10 minutes trying to find them. I can't quite remember, but they were all from that 97 to it was all okay. So it was so Bored was off Adrenaline, so it was all Adrenaline to 2000. It was all that sort of like late 90s, early 2000s period stuff.
Sounds like everything up to White Pony. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's cool. That's it's fun to imagine hearing Vowws do Deftones.
Yeah, it was nothing like us.
I know it wasn't, but it's still it's fun for the imagination. You know what I mean? To think about.
Yeah.
And that raises maybe a silly question. If Vowws were gonna cover a Deftones song, have you? Is that a thing that you could do? Is that a thing that you guys would? Probably not at this point. Like we wouldn't actually do it, but just for fun. Do you think you could go back and change and put Vowws on it?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I feel like Deftones are a band that you can interpret it because his vocals, his melodies they don't box you into a corner. Like they're emotional and they swim all over the place a lot. So you could do a lot with that. You could frame it in a lot of different ways. I think for us, I like to change the meaning of a song through like doing it very, very differently. I found out recently that that's apparently illegal sometimes. You're not allowed to, if you cover a song and completely change the chords, for instance, to make it sound really evil, then you're changing the intent behind the song and the meaning behind the lyrics and stuff. So you're actually meant to get the artist's permission if you do that. I found that out recently. I'm not meant to say this, but we actually did that with Crying by Roy Orbison and made it really sad, like really fucking dark, or as dark as we could, and probably.
I mean, that's already a pretty sad and dark song.
Yeah, I know, but it's so sad, right? But the actual music behind it sounds like sweet. So we wanted to make it sad, but bitter.
I always think of Mulholland Drive when I think of that song.
Yeah,
isn't that the film? The film that song is. I think it's Mulholland Drive. But I think it might be in Spanish.
Okay.
Which is why it comes to mind. Anyways, that would be kick ass. I really hope that the Vowws cover of Crying by Roy Orbison sees the light of day. That would be tremendous. So when you was coming to Dia de los Deftones, was that the first time that you actually got to meet Chino, meet the band, and
yes, yeah, we got to, yeah, exactly. So we got there. It was like 2:00 in the afternoon or something. We got down there. It must have been earlier than that. And we're just walking around the place, scoping the place out, and we see this dude in skinny jeans and a fresh white shirt. And we're like, that's Chino. And he was really sweet. He was a really nice guy. It was, I mean, we knew, he'd already sort of been so supportive and treated us so well that it was like, we knew what kind of person he was anyway, but, he was just as cool in person. He watched us play. It was good.
Is that because I know you guys have done quite a bit of collaborations with different well-known acts and I always think of that expression like don't meet your don't meet your heroes or that sort of thing. Not
Yeah.
to suggest that they were your heroes, but when you get that opportunity and it's cool and like you said, he came out and supported you and watched you. That's
Yeah, exactly. There was no disappointment there at all. We didn't get to actually meet. We never got to meet Gary Newman, so we never got to have that. Yeah, no, it was the same thing. It was done like remotely, the same way as Chino. So yeah, we never got that test as far as Gary's concerned. But yeah,
I didn't
Chino,
know that. I guess I just sort of assumed. That's
yeah, everyone does. Like everyone says, what was it like working with? If they ask what was it like working with Chino, we can give them a more solid answer. But what was it like working with Gary? Well, it was a year of talking to his manager and not once every couple of months and not getting anything back. And then a week before Christmas, we got his stems, the vocal stems back.
just like a sweet surprise. So to speak.
Yeah, it's just a fucking weird Christmas present.
Wild.
Gary
That's
Newman
so cool.
singing.
That's cool that you were a drummer too. That's awesome. It's funny how this podcast has sort of coincidentally, or just maybe at random, or maybe not. Like I've had a lot of drummers or ex drummers, and it's great because one of my favorite things about Deftones is talking about Abe's drumming, because I think it's so like singular to me. It's one of my favorite parts about. I always say if it doesn't have that bop, it's not Deftones. If it doesn't have that knock, what do you I would imagine that you've spent at least a little time thinking about the drumming then, having covered him back in the day. Talk about Abe's drumming.
Oh, I mean, he's got amazing feel. I was just doing a shitty impersonation of him basically, but it was a lot of fun to play because it's hard to just to sort of put into words how I would put it. It's like really solid, but it also swims around. That's how it felt to me. And I suppose a lot of those like washy characteristics I was talking about with the vocals, sort of they happen with the drums a bit too. Like he uses the cymbals really well to like lift the music in certain parts, and he has like fills that are complicated, but they don't interrupt the groove at all. He's just a real. I always sort of think the best drummers are like lyrical in the way they play, almost like solid, but like lyrical, like they're saying something with how they drum. And I think with Abe, it's definitely like that. It was a lot of fun to do those songs. And when I was growing up learning how to play guitar, like I always learned the rhythm parts and I always ignored the solos because I just wasn't interested. Like, and I don't, like, a lot of people define themselves musically by what they don't do. And for me, that was definitely one thing. It was like, no show pony antics, no sort of even really alluding to the whole rock star thing, nothing like that. Like it's more than that, or it's less than that. I don't know how you'd think of it. But one of the things, so when I'm learning people's drums, I just go for the basic feel of it. I don't try and learn all the fills and stuff. And if I do need to do a fill because it's really important, I'll do my own comfortable version of that. And so that means I don't get much better at drums, but I can do something that has a representation of the feel. It was a shitty facsimile of Abe's drumming when I was playing it, but it was a lot of fun.
Did you listen to Ohms? Have you listened to their new album?
I haven't had a chance to yet. I haven't yet.
I'd be very curious to hear what you thought about it, because it is, I think, like maybe the synth heaviest album that they've done. I mean, there are more elements of I don't know. It's almost like got some dark dance appeal to it, and I feel like that is very much your lane, like dark dance music.
Well, it's fun. It's funny because I'll say this. I don't know. So he actually sent us something. I'm not sure which song it is. I'll have to check out the album to see if it's on there. But he sent us something, and I was like, he was basically just sharing it and saying, curious to see what you guys would do over the top of this, or like what you think of it, sort of thing. So we did get to have like a listen to like in advance, but I haven't heard it since it was released.
Get out of town. So you got sent some Deftones like raw early stage material, and you got asked for your input.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if I should say it. That I just said it. Yeah, I mean, I feel a little bit like that was, you know, private on his part, but at the same time, like I think he's the kind of person that wouldn't mind. But it was, yeah.
I think that's tremendous. I think that's one of the
Yeah,
coolest
he's like
things
that
I've
though,
ever
right?
heard.
He's like that. He's just. I think he's a very open artist. Like he's very open to like the fact that he did anything with us. He had no reason to, as far as anything like career oriented. Obviously, he's why the fuck would he fuck with us? He did it because he wanted to, and because he obviously wants to give back. And I think part of that openness was like, you know, sharing stuff with us was part of an extension of like working with us and being like, I think he's pretty holistic about it.
That's
and
super cool.
Yeah, that's an extension of that.
Man, that's tremendous. That is an exciting thing for me as a Deftones fan, or just as a music fan. Like I know that music is always a collaborative effort, but to to go outside of your band or whatever to seek outside help. I'd only heard of them doing that maybe a couple of times before for like guest artists and that sort of thing. So to get a little bit more insight, I think that's a neat thing, because ultimately the music that you create, I think over the course of your career, it probably shapes what you do next. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it's something I've struggled with a lot is, you know, how to be to other people's input, criticism and things like that. I just think when you get better and better at what you do and more secure in yourself, you're more comfortable doing that. So I think in that case, he that's why he was so comfortable doing that.
What a gem. That's so cool. I really appreciate you sharing that with me. That's so cool as shit. One of the last things I want to ask you is about your music and when we're getting more. When's it coming? Can you tell us anything about what's ahead?
Yeah, so we're working on. There's no set release date yet, but we are working on a new album, and we feel like some of the best. Well, we feel like it's the best stuff we've done, and we are looking to release it as early as possible next year. So we've got all the stuff we have to put into place to make that happen, but it's being worked on at the moment. Some of it's being mixed, some of it is still being recorded. And we're doing all that shit that I was telling you about before. We're sanding off the first batch of songs and finishing producing the second batch. We've whittled it down from about 30 songs or so, or 30 song ideas.
Wow, really that many to get it down to 10 or 12?
Yeah. We're much, as we've gotten more, as we've gone on, we just get more and more selective in our sort of self-editing process. So we really want this. We want each album to be like, better's an object. It's subjective, like what is better, obviously, and each time is a slightly different direction. But we definitely don't want this album to be worse than either of the last two. So we tend to be harsh on ourselves.
I think that's a great way to go. We're just not going to make the next one worse. I don't know what we're going to do here, but it's just not going to be worse.
That's the deal breaker. That's the flaw.
You know what? We're going to scrap this one. It's worse. That's so funny.
Fucking heartbreaking. You know how hard that would be for everyone involved.
Yeah, truly.
You don't want to let people down either.
So, the way I like to wrap up each conversation is with a request for 3 recommendations. And this is inspired by something Chino said on a podcast where he only tweets out links, YouTube links, which is, I'm pretty sure, how he first introduced his affinity for you guys, right?
Yeah, he tweeted out Symbol System, which was a song from our first EP. It was amazing.
What did you think? Like, tell me for a minute to sidetrack from to diverge a little bit from my last question. What is that experience like?
I mean, firstly, I thought it was a joke. I didn't think it was real. Like, there was that. And then, I was fucking stoked. it's funny. Our first thought was like, how do we get to him? I want to say thank you. I think Riz might have like tweeted him back or something, but like our first instinct was to just like acknowledge it, and so that was super fucking cool. The other thing is like I've become very used to like not getting too high and not getting too low, so I tend to sort of try and take things in my stride as much. So it was tempered by that, I suppose. What was better was we found he went on Triple J Radio in Australia, is like the big national radio station there for like anything good, anything that's not like shitty commercial rock radio or whatever. And so he went on there, and we had a friend tweeting at us telling us that he was talking us up and like saying we were in his top 5 new bands or something like that. And then we got a tape of it and heard it, and it's just fucking great. It was just, it's the things like that keep you going, you know, like it's not easy. It's a fucking blessing to do art. Like it really is. It's the best, like it's an honor and a privilege. It really is a privilege to even be able to do it. But having said that, it can be hard, and it can be hard to keep believing in yourself or stay motivated sometimes or whatever. And, you know, I mean, for myself, like there's depression involved and all that sort of thing. So when you have someone from the outside who actually makes an effort like that to not only seek stuff out that, like, to make, that's an effort for people that they've got their own lives, like they're successful, they don't need to be doing that. So to be making an effort and then to be using their, you know, who they are, like in such a good way, that was the thing that stuck out to me, was like, this helps a lot.
Yeah, what a talk about wind in your sails. I mean, that'll put all the wind in your sails. Like that's
exactly
cool. That's tremendous.
Yeah.
Okay, so
things can only be so bad. Like,
yeah.
Sorry.
No. Yeah, no, but you're right, because and especially in art, and to persevere, because it's not. Well, like you said, it's not exactly lucrative all the time, and then it's a challenge, and then the fact that you're in a public, people have to receive it and respond, and to not get that so many times, that's daunting, right?
The opposite of validation has the opposite effect. Like if you don't have enough validation, it becomes easier to doubt yourself. And I think, unfortunately, to be a good artist, I think. I'm not certain about anything, but I think to be a good artist, you have to be able to go without validation. You have to be willing to go without validation. Like, and it's whether you can or not, it's maybe a different matter, but you need to sort of set that as the baseline, because there's going to be a lot of time when you can't rely on it. You can't rely on constant validation. That's what's wrong with like social media. Once it becomes something you rely on, if you don't get it, you're sort of fucked, and that's not always in your control.
Absolutely right, man. Yeah, you're a fucking great interview. I don't know if you've been told that often, but you're a fucking great interview.
Thanks, man.
So
you're a good interviewer.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, you're. I've had a lot of practice lately, especially on Zoom, and I think it's just it's my medium. Yeah. So I'm getting a little more comfortable in my medium. Cool. So the last question that I ask is for 3 recommendations, because. Mm-hmm. Like I said, Chino only tweets out stuff that he likes. He thinks that that's like the best thing that somebody can get from him. So in that spirit, 3 recommendations across the board. Doesn't have to be limited to music or anything old or new.
Okay.
Anything at all. The floor is yours.
Okay. I will start with music. Let me. You can still see me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. 1 second. Her name is Kate Tempest. I think she's relatively well known, at least in the UK. And she's like, as far as I know, she started out sort of as like almost like a beat poet. She was more into like the actual words themselves. She's a deliverer of messages basically. But then she got into doing it like as music. And I wouldn't call it like hip hop necessarily. It's really flowing. It's really fucking confronting. Like her use of, it's very British, strong accent and all that kind of thing. But her flow and her delivery, her feel and her lyrics just hit me straight away. And yeah, it gets pretty emotional. I would definitely recommend. So it's Kate Tempest. I would definitely recommend someone checking her out. And okay, let's see. Do you know Slayford Mods?
No.
No. So it's Slayford Mods. It's Slayford. I think it's Sleaford or Slayford. It was a place in England. SLEAFORD. The second word is mods, just like mods like back in the 60s, MODS.
Yeah.
And again, they're like, I've been on a sort of like British kick lately. Again, they're very British. Like it's like they sort of, so it's just two dudes. When they play live, it's hilarious. The dude on a laptop just stands there with a beer. And the other guy is doing all the vocals and everything. So the guy that stands there with a laptop, he makes all the beats and stuff, right? So he's doing the music, but it's almost a little bit like performance art in its own right, because he's literally standing there going, I don't have to fucking put on a show for you people. I made the music. It's my laptop. I'm gonna have a beer. And the vocalist, his name is Jason, I forget his surname, Jason Williamson. He just has a way of capturing the sort of like downtrodden anger of a lot of British life. Because I sort of get the impression that it's, underneath the sort of stiff upper lip Britishness of just keeping calm and carrying on. I think there's a lot of problems in Britain that aren't being solved. And this guy just has a really, really aggressive, rhythmic and fucking strangely musical, even though it sounds really amateurish. Like it's very bedroom, but it's so fucking cool. He just has a really interesting way of putting things, and he'll just say like 2 or 3 words. The chorus is coming, not because the chorus is happening, not because the music has changed, but because he literally sings the same thing like 4 times, and you're like, oh, that's a chorus. And then you listen to the song the next time, the time after that, and you're like, that's a fucking chorus. That's super cool. Definitely worth checking out. So it's Slayford Mods, and I could be pronouncing it wrong. It could be Sleaford Mods. I think it's Slayford. The last one, and this is like a pretty basic recommendation, I suppose. I've just, the term Kafkaesque?
Sure.
Yeah, right. So I never read Franz Kafka, and I just started, and he's fucking incredible. And what I found out, which I'm sure I'm way behind on this, he never had any recognition in his life. He never got published in his life. He died when he was like 41 or 42. And it sort of ties into what I was saying before about how the opposite of validation has the opposite effect. Like he got to the point where he never had any success. So he had a job. His father was a really sort of like domineering kind of guy and basically forced him to go and work at, I think, a law firm he was an accountant. And he just hated his life, but he'd come home from his day job and he'd just write. And he told his friend when he died, or before he died, burn manuscripts, never publish them, because I know they're crap. Like he was like, he did it purely because he wanted to do it, not because he knew he wasn't going to ever get any recognition from it. And his friend read all his manuscripts and he's like, holy fuck, I'm going to get these published. And then he got them published within like a year or something like that. And he became one of the most influential writers of the 20th century without ever knowing, while thinking the whole time while knowing that he wasn't good enough. Like, that's fucking crazy to me.
Wow. That's fascinating. I had no idea.
Neither did I. And I just, check out Kafka. And I started reading a couple of his books, and it's absurd enough without being difficult to follow. Like what he's trying to say about the futility and the absurdity of modern life is right there. Like it's really, and it's also entertaining. Like, definitely recommend him.
Okay, I got a little more to share with you, but first I have to say, I love so many things about this conversation. I can't even name them all. First, regarding their collaboration with Chino on Structure of Love 2. Wow. So amazing that he basically stole a trick from Chino, used it in that song, and ultimately gave it to him to sing. Like, amazing. And when Matt talked about getting the raw vocals back from Chino, little hairs on my arm stood up. And dude, imagine Chino sending you some Deftones instrumentals and asking you what you would do with it. That is the coolest shit ever. I mean the coolest. And knowing that Matt and Riz played Deftones songs together back in the day, like how cool is that? I loved hearing about the early days of Vowws and their creative process and how they make the sounds that they do. Like that was so cool. You know, if you're wondering why we spent so much time talking about Vowws, I'm pleased to share this little moment of clarity I had while talking to Matt.
Well, I think, part of what informs my or anybody's understanding of an artist is trying to understand the art that they're into. And that includes you, right? Like that's, I think that's super informative and will, and hopefully will broaden every Deftones fan's understanding of what they're getting, you know? Like it's music's great to just listen to, but it's also like they make pretty artful shit. So I think that's important to pay attention to as well, you know?
There's definitely layers of appreciation once you start to delve into people's influences and stuff like that.
Man, if you want to listen to Ohms and then email me and let me know which song you heard, let me know.
I will. I wonder if it's on there.
I really would love to know, and I would love for you to hear, because there are some starkly just synth moments, and some very, like, a lot of it. It's almost a dance record, to be honest with you. Like there are heavy and aggressive moments on the album, but it's a dance. It's like a dance album. Like there's every song has got parts.
That's fascinating.
It's really cool. It's really, I think it's probably my favorite Deftones album. And that alone is a fascinating thing. Here we are, 9 studio releases deep over 25 plus years, and they're still making, in my opinion, their best work. That's remarkable,
Well, maybe that's maybe their attitude where they're not sort of resting on any laurels. They're always wanting to check out new stuff. Maybe the fact that he did discover us and took the time and effort, and he's constantly supporting and tweeting people. Like maybe that thing is the same thing that sort of keeps them ahead of the game musically and keeps them from just churning out the same shit.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Exploration is what ultimately creates that new thing, right? Is you got to be willing to.
On all levels.
Thank you, Matt, for taking the leap and being so generous with your time and for sharing your stories and your music with me. I don't know that I could accurately express my level of gratitude to you for what you brought to my little passion project here. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for hanging out with me while we talk about Deftones. Come back next week when I talk to Ralph from Total Meltdown, Jeff Cagle after that, Zach and Kelly from 30 Nights of Violence, December 18th, and on Christmas Day,
Creed parties.
Braun from Mastodon. My name is Woody. If you want to talk about the podcast, you can reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram at Woodbruh. You can find the Change Pod on Spotify, Apple Pods, Google Pods, iHeart, Omni, and of course on 93x.com. Thank you for listening to Deftones, and thank you for listening to Change in the House of Pods.